Hello and welcome to Trojan Vision One-on-One. I am your host, Stephanie East. This is where we get to know more about the people here at Troy University, not just the school, but the people who make the school such a special place. And I'm so excited today to have Dr. Kerry Palmer, the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, with us to get to know you a little more. Thank you, because I know you are so busy. Thank you for taking the time
thank
to
you.
be here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Palmer, start off by telling us a little bit about you, where you're from, your academic background before you got here to Troy University.
Well, I'm originally from Montgomery. I grew up there, went to Lee High School, graduated and came to school here, which I now, looking back on, realize what a life-changing decision that was. I was considering at the time going to the University of Alabama to be a music ed major, and I was actually in Tuscaloosa at the All-State Festival when I met Johnny Long for the first time, and he encouraged me to come and meet with his staff and everything down here, and they gave me a scholarship, and I changed direction and came to Troy instead, and everything, you know, so much really changed right there for me. But graduated and became a band director, did that for 12 years at several schools in central Alabama and one school in Georgia. Got a master's degree in educational leadership from Auburn University of Montgomery, and then went into educational leadership, became a principal, became a school head, got a doctorate at Auburn University, and was recruited back home.
Well, did you always know you wanted to be in the education field?
I did not for the longest time. I think once I got into band in junior high and high school, and I honestly thought, you know, I enjoy this so much, wouldn't it be fun to do this from now on? And I felt like I had I enjoyed it, had an aptitude for it, and came down here and majored in music ed and thoroughly enjoyed teaching. Taught everything from about 5th grade through the 12th grade over those years. And it was a wonderful career. It was a busy career, a lot of work, a lot of nights and weekends, but I still keep in contact with a good many of the students I taught in those days.
Well, I'm always so jealous of anybody who has any musical talent because I have zero. So what instrument did you play?
Well, I played the baritone. That's a little bit like a small tuba. Most people don't know what a baritone or a euphonium is. That was what ended up really opening the door for me to come here. Dr. Long had gone to the All-State Band in Tuscaloosa, and I was in the red band, the top band, and he needed baritone players in his band down here, and looked back at us in the section back there and said, you know, if any of you fellows want to come down here to Troy, I've got some scholarship money for you. So it being a rather obscure instrument ended up being a good thing for me because that was just precisely what was needed here.
Well, and of course, Dr. Long is such a legend here at Troy University. How did he help shape you as a person and an educator?
It's remarkable. You know, I don't think there's a day that goes by, especially in my work, where I don't think of him and where I don't think of some lesson that he taught us. And many of the lessons that he taught us through his, we call them longisms, these famous sayings and whatnot that he had, you know, at the time we're like, what on earth is he talking about? It's only years later, like today, that, oh yeah, I see exactly the wisdom he was trying to, you know, apply to us. But, you know, I learned a lot about music from him. I learned a lot about being a good band director, but I learned much more about being a good person and a good citizen and a hard-working leader and administrator. And I got to see real leadership up and close when I was here because of the way that he involved his student leadership in decision making. And literally, there were many times he was mulling over a decision and would have all of us undergraduate student leaders sitting in his office and talk the whole thing through with us. I'm sure he did it with his staff as well, but we got to see the inside of that, and it was just as fascinating as it could be.
Well, do you have a particular memory besides that of Dr. Long and your time in music and Sound of the South that sticks out that you like to talk about?
Well, there's a picture in my office I like to point out to people, especially if I have members of the Sound of the South drop by to see me for some reason, but it's a photograph that Dr. Long asked to be taken just before I went into the stadium for my first game as drum major of the band. And back in those days, we only had one drum major. And I was nervous. I mean, my face is really white in that picture. We're standing next to each other. You can see band members in the background. And I envisioned him going in with us, you know, and being down there sort of, especially the first few games. And they snapped that photograph, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, don't play when we have the ball. I'll see you after halftime." And he just walked away. And there were 300 bandsmen standing there and a time clock to be reckoned with to get that band on the field for pregame. And I thought, well, I guess this is how you learn to be a leader under Johnny Long.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm so jealous of anybody who has musical talent, but why is a music education so important to students? Why do you encourage them to possibly get involved with a band or get involved with music?
Yeah, I think that music has the same, I think it works the same way and benefits students in the same way that sports does. It can be theater, anything that gives a student an opportunity to belong to a team, to work together for a common cause, to be a part of something larger than oneself, and the discipline I think that comes with it as well. You know, we see that in our athletes. I spoke just recently to the capstone leadership class in the Institute for Leadership Development here at Troy. 3 members of the basketball team came walking in the room and came over to me and shook my hand, and I knew good and well they'd gotten that from their coach. And that's the type of thing you learn when you're in any organization that, you know, the coach or the director wants the organization to represent the institution well. And I think music does that. I think there's a lot of things it does, you know, it's said to help with math and all kinds of other things, but the activity itself and the being a part of a thing, to me, is very important.
Well, you mentioned that you taught in the K through 12 system. So tell us a little bit about that and your background in that area.
You know, it's interesting. I was telling someone just the other day, I was talking to a band director. The local band director came by to see me, wanted to ask some advice about a job he's thinking about taking, and just kind of talk the situation through. And we were talking about schedule, how you have your classes scheduled. And I told him, I said, you know, the best class schedule I ever had as a teacher was in the job I was paid the least amount of money. I was only paid $25,000 a year to be the band director at Capitol Heights Junior High School in Montgomery. Had a 6-period school day, and I had the opportunity to set that schedule up any way I liked, and I was able to group the instruments and have a good experience. And it really struck me that you know, that school was a place you would never have thought you could do something good, but the conditions were better than I thought when I got in there. And it was there that I realized you don't have to have a nice facility, you don't have to have a lot of money to develop a really fine program. So I've taught in a large junior high school like that. I've taught at Jeff Davis High in Montgomery. I taught in Tallahassee, so a smaller town in a rural community. And I had the privilege of starting the band program at Montgomery Catholic Preparatory School, and it just warms my heart. That's one of our thriving band programs in this region, one of the very best, and they send some fine students here to be in the Sound of the South. And I have a former student of mine that's the director there, and it's heartwarming to see that. But I've taught public, private, small town, big city, and everything in between.
And I'm trying to remember, so excuse me if I'm not telling this right, but I remember we talked a few years ago and you mentioned you had a student that became a conductor and invited you to go see him. Tell us that story.
Yes, I had a student at Jeff Davis named Norman Nguyen. And Norman's mother owned a small Chinese restaurant just off of Maxwell Air Force Base. Norman never had a car or anything like that when he was in school. And when he would wait for someone to give him a ride home, he would stay after. He played the same instrument as me, and we would practice together and help him get ready for All-State. He was a fine young man, a fine musician, but didn't come from great means. But he told me that when he graduated from high school, he was going to go to the University of Alabama to study with a gentleman named DeMondre Thurman up there. He was a very fine teacher. And then he wanted to go to like Juilliard or someplace like that. And he did that. And he majored in orchestral conducting. And he was the associate conductor of the Portland Symphony. He's in Bozeman, Montana now as the conductor of the symphony in that town. And came down to guest conduct the Mobile Symphony a couple of years ago and invited my wife and myself to sit front and center for that concert, and also invited Al Grove and his wife. Al was assistant principal at Jeff Davis back at that same time. And to have him tell everybody, that's my high school band director sitting there. I thought, my goodness, he's come a long way. But that band at Jeff Davis in Montgomery, large school, 2,000 students, urban, very difficult situation in many ways. I had some of the very best, if not the best, musicians I've ever taught come through that program. 2 or 3, Norman and 2 others are professionals. They make their living solely by music today. So, it kind of goes back again. You don't have to be in a fancy place sometimes to have a special, bond with your students or have good results.
And how does that make you feel, like when you see your students become successful in whatever area it is, whether it's band or education? As an educator, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's the greatest feeling. I mean, it's just the greatest feeling. I'll never forget, watching Norman conduct that orchestra. I have a student that I taught in junior high that's in the Commandant's Own Marine Corps Drum and Bugle Corps in Washington, D.C. The young lady who co-directs the band at Catholic was one of my students. Music professor at Alabama State, one of my students. And yeah, it's the most heartwarming thing in the world. I don't think that a teacher could ask for anything more than to see their students succeed.
And I know, this is my second career, but I see exactly what you're talking about, because when my students, when I see them become reporters or see them at the anchor desk, I never thought that I would be just so incredibly proud of them, but it truly is so amazing. So talk a little bit about what led you to switch from K through 12 education to higher ed? I was at Trinity Presbyterian School in Montgomery for almost 11 years. And the first 5 of those, I was the principal of the middle school, and then I became the head of school. And that role included me working for a board of trustees. It included a lot of fundraising. We had to establish our budget each year by setting tuition, just like you do here. All kinds of the financial things, the physical plan, everything was so similar to this. It was appealing to me when I had the opportunity. Now, I will say I had no ambition to work in the university setting. I was completing a PhD at Auburn University, and Dr. Hawkins, I think, was interested in me getting affiliated with our College of Education. And when I came into Troy University to be the associate dean of that college, I was hopeful that perhaps I would be dean, and then, as far as I was concerned, that was that. Being dean of the College of Education was a good step from being in K-12 for so long. And I never in a million years planned to be in the job that I'm in today. It was just an opportunity that presented itself, and I decided you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So. One thing about Troy is we have such great programs, and we talk about the journalism program is one of the top 6 in the nation, our nursing program, and our education department is amazing as well. Brag a little bit about the education department.
I'm so proud of our history, really, and our legacy. We started as a teacher's college in 1887, and during the 1930s, we were really among the finest in the country. There was 10 teacher training programs across America that were listed as exemplars by Columbia Teachers College up in New York, and we were one of those. And they actually sent people down here to research the methods that were taking place here in Troy. And so when I was dean of that college, I felt it was my duty to see that teacher ed program, which is really only one of several programs within the College of Ed, but to see that teacher ed program was at the very top in this state. And that anytime we do that, it's a comfortable place for Troy to be. We've been at that level so many times in so many years. Fred Figliano heads that college now. Joe Johnson heads up the teacher education program. They're doing a marvelous job. We've developed close relationships with the State Board of Education and the state superintendent. I think that's very important. And we see ourselves as being in partnership with them to do what we can to produce quality teachers for Alabama schools.
Well, now you serve as the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. You're all over campus all of the time. That's why I said I'm so glad you could take time to talk to us today. Tell us a little bit about what that role entails.
You know, I didn't really realize the scope of the role until I got in it. And really the first year truly was drinking out of a fire hydrant. I'm not sure the fire hydrant's been cut off yet, but the first year was very much getting my arms around that. But all 5 of the academic deans report to me. Library dean, graduate dean, institutional research office reports to me. We have a lot of functions. Even the International Arts Center reports up to me. But the biggest thing about that job, I'm appreciative of being on the university's main senior leadership team. Dr. Hawkins doesn't make decisions in a bubble. He includes the senior vice chancellors in that process. And you know, we meet every other week as an executive council for 2 hours, 2.5 hours sometimes, going over everything that is a priority for this university. And so I'm able to really see the whole institution from this point. And at the same time, try to leverage us to where we're offering the right academic programs for what students are looking for today, seeing to it that those programs are the highest level quality. So spend a lot of time with our deans and focusing on making programs our students want and need and making the best they can be.
Well, speaking of academic programs, one recent announcement was the fact that we're bringing engineering here to Troy. Talk a little bit about what led to that and what the future holds for that program.
Yeah, the idea of us bringing engineering to Troy, I think it represents, for me personally, feel very pleased about that. From a professional standpoint, because I think it's an absolute game changer for this university. Once we launched that program, within a couple of weeks, we had over 260 applications for that. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is, those applications are coming from people who ordinarily would not apply here. They wouldn't even look at Troy because we didn't have that degree. And so these are new students, people that haven't ordinarily considered Troy. So the engineering came about as a result of what we perceived as a need, especially in Southeast Alabama. If you wanted to be an engineer, electrical engineer in South Alabama, if you were anything close to home, would be University of South Alabama or Auburn. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Auburn, that can sometimes be cost prohibitive for students that live in this region of the state. So when we launched that, we were working to meet a need, and the state of Alabama has responded with robust funding for it, which we didn't anticipate. That was just a nice surprise. But I think that goes to show that when you align your academic programs with what the workforce needs, things come together and they happen. So we reorganized our colleges so that we could effectively promote that engineering program. I was concerned that if we launched one engineering program, electrical engineering, that if it were buried deep within the programmatic structure of the College of Arts and Sciences, it would be difficult to promote that. So when you move some things around and create a College of Science and Engineering, that's something that you could talk about, you can promote. So we had a big press event to showcase that, and we've had a great response.
Well, and another thing that Troy has been doing recently is these fantastic buildings that are coming on campus that are enhancing the educational experience as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I think two very significant, the most recent 2 buildings, the CMMS, which opened in the fall, is the first building on this campus to be dedicated solely to research. That represents a real maturation, a real growth point, if you will, in Troy University's history, because we started off as an institution that only was maybe a 3-year program, training people to become classroom teachers. And now we've branched all the way to where we have a building designed for nothing more than research. There's not a single classroom in that building. And then Jones Hall, there's such a need for people in the medical field. There's a nursing shortage. Rural doctors, there's a shortage. And we've had a fine nursing program for a long time at Troy, but they've been housed in a former elementary school for many years. Now we have this state-of-the-art facility with labs. I took a picture and sent it to my wife the other day and said, I feel like I'm standing in a hospital. The entire instructional area looks like you're in a hospital. We're already seeing quite an impact from a recruiting standpoint. And I think it once again demonstrates our commitment to providing relevant education. And that's really important now. And I think, as the public becomes more discerning in their choices about what to do after high school, showing that real world application is just ever so more important.
And I want to talk more about your vision for Troy in just a minute, but you mentioned the practical education you get at Troy, and I do want to brag on the journalism program because I'm a graduate of Troy, and we have this hands-on television station where you can anchor, report. We're here in it right now, and really gives us that firsthand knowledge. And I start with that to say, I love talking to you about journalism because you come from a journalism family. Yes. Your father, a very prominent political cartoonist. Tell us a little bit about growing up in that environment.
Yeah, it was really something. The first time I realized that my dad maybe did something that got people's attention was when I was a child, a little boy, and within a few weeks of each other, he got 2 letters from Gerald Ford, who was president at the time, and was writing him about one of his cartoons that was run in the White House News Summary and asking Dad for an autographed copy for him to send to him. I'm like, my goodness, are you kidding me? That's the President of the United States. At the time, Dad was at the Dallas Morning News out in Texas. He came back here in 1978 to replace Frank Spangler. Frank Spangler and then Frank Spangler's father before him had been renowned editorial cartoonists for the Montgomery Advertiser. And my father had started his job at the Alabama Journal in the 60s, which is the former afternoon paper. He came back here from Dallas because he said there was no place in the world where it would be more fun to draw political cartoons than Montgomery, Alabama, especially then. You had George Wallace, you had some of these colorful characters, Jim Folsom Jr., people like that. He just had a ball. And one of his favorite subjects was Ralph Adams, the former president of Troy.
And in fact, some of his cartoons are hung up in one of the buildings here, and it's interesting to go look at them.
It was really uncanny. My dad had a good relationship with Dr. Adams, but and my dad called him as he saw him, and he would draw cartoons that would either poke fun at him or, maybe be a little critical. And Dr. Adams always reached out to him and asked for the originals, and they hung them in his office. And I think he didn't really care so much what was said as long as they spelled his name right and had Troy State in the paper.
There you go. I love when people can have a good sense of humor about themselves, so I love hearing that. So tell us a little bit about what you see Troy University's future, say over the next 5 years, 10 years.
I think higher education is really at a reckoning place right now. And I think that, when you look at what's happening in Washington right now and you see cuts to federal contracts and grants, for the first time in my career, I sat with a group of people from an R1, very, very prominent research institution, flush with federal money, and saw those people sweating just a little bit because they're not getting that cash that they're used to. Everything in the higher ed landscape has changed, and higher ed is going to have to be willing to change, and they're going to have to be able to change quickly. In Alabama, we hear a lot about workforce development. We hear a lot about the 2-year system. You can get some really good jobs at good pay without a 4-year degree today. So the idea of just having college be the rite of passage for a student after high school is really over. The public are very discerning. They want to know that there's real value, that there's going to be a return on their investment. And for us, that's going to mean a focus on what's truly needed and the types of jobs out there that will require a 4-year degree. Engineering being a good one, you can technically become an engineer without a 4-year degree, but it's mighty difficult to do. It's obviously not going to be a doctor without a 4-year degree and that type of thing. And so we really have to focus there. I'm proud of our faculty because when we proposed earlier this academic year the movement of these programs in these colleges. As you may imagine, there was resistance and skepticism.
Sure.
But we were able to pull that off and get that program launched inside one academic year. And in higher ed, that's just unheard of. So if our faculty will respond to the need to make quicker changes than they're accustomed to, then I'm very optimistic about this university's future, because I think the universities that can do that are going to be the ones that are going to survive.
And I know what I tell students when they're considering which college to go to. Of course, being a Troy grad, I want to encourage everyone to come here, especially if they're majoring in journalism and communications. When you're out in the community, what do you just say to students who go, I'm not sure where I'm going to go? How do you encourage them to choose Troy?
I tell them oftentimes, people respond well to stories, and I tell stories about the relationships that I have to this day with some of my professors. And relationships that ended up being lifelong, because there was a personal connection while I was here, and because I knew that while I was here and after I left, that those professors truly cared about me and wanted to help me succeed. That's something that we have here at Troy that's very special. Some of it is from just because we're a little smaller. We don't have 30 or 40,000 students on this campus. We have a little over 6,000. It's much easier to have those connections. But I also think it speaks to the fundamental culture of this institution. We tend to attract and retain faculty who truly care about their students. We screen for it. I don't know of very many universities in America, especially this size, where every tenured track faculty that's coming through to be hired has to interview with me and has to interview with the Chancellor. That's unusual, but what Dr. Hawkins and I are looking for is fit. We're looking for the right fit. We operate under the assumption they wouldn't be sitting in our office if they weren't qualified. But we want to know if they're right for Troy. And that layer, that extra layer of protection of the culture, has been what served this institution so well. So I like to tell people stories from my time coming along, but I also like to tell them from my perspective as a leader, hey, this is this important to us, that two very busy men carve out time to interview these faculty coming in.
You're absolutely right. I was just talking to somebody about that the other day, that I have professors that still keep up with me, check in on me when I got the job here, we're excited. And I didn't realize until I started here, like how much they cared about me, now that I feel the same way about my students here. So absolutely, you are right on track with that. Dr. Palmer, I appreciate you taking the time to be here so much and telling us a little bit more about you and your role here at Troy, and just letting us get to know you a little bit more.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And that's it for Trojan Vision One-on-One. We'll see you back here next time.